Hello there, people of the internet. Not too terribly long ago, I made a short talking about how 9mm was the best survival cartridge. And in that video, I got a bunch of comments, and there was a bunch of people telling me, no, this particular thing is the best, or no, that particular thing is the best. And, well, whenever I made that short, I wasn't trying to say that 9mm is the best cartridge. I was trying to say it is the best cartridge for a survivalist sort of situation. And a lot of people would go in there and they would argue, you know, yes, no, maybe so, I think it's this, I think it's that. But I did make some good arguments on that video, and I wanted to go ahead and follow up that video with an actual video. So let's go ahead and do that. A lot of people were going on that video and commenting things like no 45 ACP or no 357 Magnum or no insert other cartridge here would be a better option than 9mm because it is more powerful. And well, yeah, that was their argument, because it performed better than a 9mm cartridge. And yes, there are things out there that perform better than 9mm. I'm not saying that 9mm is the best performing cartridge. I'm saying it's the best survival cartridge. Now, although there are things out there that perform better than 9mm, for the performance that you get from 9mm, for the price point that you spend on it, it literally cannot be beat. So you have a good performance at a good price point. That is probably one of the main reasons why I would lean towards 9mm as a survival cartridge. Don't worry, all you 22 long rifle guys who are typing in the comments below, we will go ahead and get to 22 long rifle here in a second. So 9mm tends to be dramatically cheaper than all of the other options that are out there. Like, for example, it's about half the cost of 45 ACP and, like, oh, I don't know, a third of the cost of 357 Magnum, maybe even less than that. So it is significantly cheaper to get your hands on 9mm than it is anything else. Not only that, but during the modern days that we have right now, 9mm in the United States is much more available than even 45 ACP or 357 Magnum or a variety of different handgun cartridges that are out there on the market. Now, these other handgun cartridges are in fact out there and popular on the market, but they're not as popular as 9mm. 9mm has just become the absolute staple whenever it comes to the popular handgun cartridge here in the US. Not just in the US, but all around the world. 9mm has become the standard, and so as a result, it is the easiest to get your hands on, and because there's so many people making so much of it, it's also going to be the cheapest option. There are less powerful rounds than 9mm that are significantly more expensive than 9mm. So if you were to go like the route of 380 or 32 ACP or 25 ACP, less powerful rounds than 9mm, you would find that 9mm has more power but less cost and dramatically more availability. So that is one of the main reasons why I think this right here is the best possible cartridge. Combine the dramatic amount of ammunition that you can get, like the dramatically large amount of ammunition that you can get and the variety of ammunition that you can get for 9mm, combine that with the number of platforms that 9mm is chambered in. You name a popular platform that exists, odds are it is chambered in 9mm. That is not the case with, say, like 357 Magnum. You're not going to find a whole lot of semi-autos in 357 Magnum. There's quite a few in 45 ACP, but there are more widely available options in 9mm. Not only that, but another big caveat for 9mm, capacity and lightweight ammunition. 45 ACP is going to have more power going down range, absolutely. But you're going to pay for that more power because that is a less common cartridge nowadays. Not only that, but you're going to be carrying less ammunition. So there is a dramatic trade-off for that. You're also going to have less capacity inside of your magazine if your magazines are going to be the same size. 9mm is simply a smaller round, and so as a result, you can shove more ammunition inside of your magazines. Now, a lot of people will argue, well, you know, if you go to 22 long rifle, that is a dramatically better option because it is less cost and an even smaller, lighter weight option. And yes, I absolutely agree with that. 22 long rifle is a fanatically good cartridge for survival purposes. However, the amount of trade-off that you get for the lack of power and the lack of velocity in comparison to how much smaller and lighter weight it is to 9mm, the trade-off simply is not adequate enough to have the cons justify the pros, or the pros justify the cons. Yeah, that one. So 22 long rifle is smaller. and it is cheaper than 9mm, but it's not that much smaller, it's not that much lighter weight, and it's not that much cheaper than 9mm, considering that 9mm has dramatically more power than a 22 long rifle. Your platforms that run 9mm are going to typically be more reliable than platforms that run 22 long rifle as well. So reliability with 9mm is also going to be a very big thing. Not only that, but if you're in a survivalist situation, 9mm is reloadable, assuming that you're getting boxer primed at 9mm. So you'll be able to reload your ammunition, unlike with a 22 long rifle. Now, 9mm tends to have a heavier projectile as well, so you're lobbing much more lead downrange with every shot fired, so whenever you make impact on your target, you're going to have, obviously, much more energy transferred onto that target than, say, if you were to go with a 22 long rifle. Now, whenever it comes to a survivalist situation, a lot of people will talk about touching out to various distances, and one of the things that keeps people away from 9mm as a survivalist cartridge are people thinking that they will not be able to touch out to distances with 9mm because 9mm is simply too weak. And these same people who talk about 9mm being too weak are typically the same people who say 22 long rifle is absolutely adequate enough to be able to touch out to, like, say, 200 yards, for example, as long as you have proper shot placement. Well, that 9mm was significantly more energy transfer out at that 200-yard mark. You got proper shot placement with that 9mm. And hey, guess what? You're going to have significantly more likelihood of putting down whatever target it is that you are shooting at. So the amount of energy transfer and the amount of energy transfer and the lack of cons, the lack of differences between the weight and size of 22 long rifle and 9mm kind of leans me more towards 9mm. I actually have a couple of charts here for 9mm and 22 long rifle in my little notebook here that I write everything down in. Now, there's a lot of different loadings for 9mm and a lot of different loadings for 22 long rifle, so I'm just going to go ahead and go with average numbers. I went with 124 grain 9mm because that's the NATO loading, and out of a 4, maybe 5-inch barrel, they're going to be traveling, like if you have a standard size handgun, those 124 grain projectiles are going to be traveling at about 1,200 feet per second or so. Now, all that being said, once you bump that up to like a 16-inch carbine, like what I have right here in 9mm, once you bump that up to a 16-inch carbine, you start to see much better velocities. Like 9mm, that 124 grain out of a 16-inch barrel should be going at about 1,350 feet per second or so. But just for the sake of argument, most situations would involve 9mm from a handgun, so we're going to go ahead and stick with the 1,200 foot per second argument from that handgun with 125 grain. Now, if you were to set yourself up with a 100-yard zero to where you hit right on target at that 100 yards, out to about 50 yards, you're only going to see about 2.5 inches of climb with that round, because the round is not quite in line with the sights, so it kind of like arcs its way in. You're only going to see 2.5-inch rise, and that's not going to be significant enough to throw off your shot, not unless you're going after like a squirrel or something within that 50 yards, in which case just bear in mind that you're going to be hitting about 2.5 inches high at 50 yards, but you're going to be hitting dead on at your 100-yard mark. Now, all of that being said, from the muzzle, that 1,200 foot-pounds of energy is going to have approximately 430, or that 1,200 feet per second muzzle energy is going to have about 430 foot-pounds of energy on the target. I am absolutely baking out here. It is hot and I am dehydrated. I apologize if I am slurring my words. 1,200 foot per second at the muzzle, 430 foot-pounds of energy onto your target. Now, whenever it comes to people talking about 9mm at long ranges and how inadequate it is, once we bump out to that 100-yard mark and we're hitting right at our point of aim, that 1,200 foot per second with our 124 grain projectile has dumbed down to 1,000 feet per second, and we're looking at just over 300 foot-pounds of energy onto the target, which is not necessarily a lot in comparison to, say, rifle rounds, but it's still a pretty substantial amount. Now, once we go out to that 200-yard mark, which is the mark that I'd say most people would like mark their limits at whenever it comes to a survival cartridge. A lot of us can shoot out to like 300, 400, 500 yards, but for the average person, 200 yards is going to be absolutely adequate, because that's a pretty fair distance. So 9mm at 200 yards is going to be going about 900 or so feet per second. And it's going to have about 240 foot-pounds of energy onto the target. Now, all of that being said, if you have a 100-yard zero, you're going to see about 30 inches of drop at that 200-yard mark. So a little bit over 2 feet. As a matter of fact, about a little bit over 2.5 feet. Now, that is substantial, but at the same time, that's not exactly a deal killer. If you were to aim, like if you had a person down there and you aimed at the head, you'd hit them in the torso. You could make shots with that 30-inch drop. Now, as we touch out to farther distances beyond that, that's where things start to get a little bit more sketchy. And the people who argue with 22 long rifle, they'll argue out to that 200-yard mark. Well, at that 200-yard mark, you still have 240 foot-pounds of energy onto the target. One of the biggest things I heard with 9mm was that once you go out to longer distances, you start to see drops in the amount of energy that you put on your target, so you don't want to hit anything with less energy. Like you would want some sort of cartridge that has more energy at those distances. But then those same people will argue 22 long rifle can be had at 150, 200 yards if you really needed to with proper shot placement. Well, 9mm with proper shot placement has significantly more energy than 22 long rifle at the muzzle. As a matter of fact, 22 long rifle, there's a variety of different 22 long rifle out there. A 40 grain projectile, which is about your standard that you would see. There's heavier, there's lighter. I'm going with average. And I've seen anywhere from like 1,000 feet per second to 1,500 feet per second, so I just went with 1,200 feet per second as like a standard for 22 long rifle. Of course, your barrel length and the ammunition that you use, all of this is going to be a huge variety or a huge variable. That's the word I'm looking for, a huge variable whenever it comes to 22 long rifle. Lots and lots and lots and lots of different options out there. I'm going with just like the median of everything. So a 40 grain projectile is going to travel about 1,200 or so feet per second if you're firing it from a rifle length barrel. And from the muzzle, that's going to impart 140 foot-pounds of energy onto your target. And for the people out there who say 22 long rifle is adequate enough for taking medium game like deer and whatnot, even taking bigger things than that, the 9mm at 200 yards should be absolutely no question for you, with it having 240 foot-pounds of energy as opposed to the 22 long rifles 140 foot-pounds of energy. It isn't until you get to the 400-yard mark with 9mm, which is an absolutely obscene distance for 9mm. Once you get to that 400-yard mark with 9mm, that 9mm 124 grain projectile will be traveling at about 750 feet per second, and you're only going to have about 175 foot-pounds of energy onto the target. Now, all of that being said, at that 100-yard mark, you still have more energy with that 9mm, that 400-yard mark. At that 400-yard mark, you still have more energy with that 9mm than you do with that 22 long rifle at the muzzle, with the 22 long rifle being 140 grain or 140 foot-pounds of energy on target, and the 9mm being 175 foot-pounds of energy onto the target. So, yeah, 9mm is absolutely 110% powerful enough to be able to take things out at, well within 400 yards if you can manage to accurately hit with 9mm out at those distances. So for the people who are claiming that 9mm is underpowered at distance, then yeah, no, especially if you believe that 22 long rifle is adequate enough to be able to handle whatever job it is that you need handled. Now, I would not touch out with 9mm beyond a 200-yard mark, but yes, some people out there probably could be able to pull that off if they had accurate enough firearms and they were accurate enough themselves. With like intermediate and full power rifle cartridges, I can't really touch out to like, what would you call it, 100, maybe 200 yards. That's the distance of my range and my capabilities. Now, once I get beyond that 200-yard mark, I start to see a real diminishing accuracy. I'd say like my absolute maximum is probably about 300 yards, let alone that 400-yard mark. But I wouldn't run 9mm past that 200-yard mark. So now what we're going to do is I have my 9mm carbine here. We've gone over all of the numbers. I've given a ton of examples for this video. I want to go ahead and step out to 100 yards, and I'm going to put some wood up down here on the gun range. They're going to be, I don't know, what's the thickness of this right here? About an inch. They're going to be about an inch worth of wood that I'm going to be sending some 9mm full metal jackets at 100 yards. And we're going to see those 9mm absolutely poke holes in this wood. Like, they're going to go straight through this wood without any questions asked. So let me go ahead and set up the wood and walk out there to that distance, and we'll continue from there. Okay, we are out here at our 100-yard mark. Most people at this distance, this would be basically as far as most people would be able to accurately fire anyway. So at this distance, we are going to have, approximately 300 or so foot-pounds of energy onto our target. We are actually firing 115 grain projectiles as opposed to the 124 grain projectiles that I previously talked about. So the velocities and energy on target will be slightly different, but it should be around that ballpark. And, well, although a lot of people would be able to shoot past this distance, I feel like for hunting and shooting at medium game, especially here in the place that I am currently residing in, I feel like this right here would be an adequate distance for most people. Don't you just love Florida? Now, if you are in the plains of the Midwest or something like that, then maybe you are in a location where you might have, well, maybe you're in a location where you might be taking shots out beyond that 200-yard mark on a regular basis, in which case I would see 22 long rifle, or not 22 long rifle, 9mm not being the best option for you. You might want something more like an intermediate caliber cartridge or a full power rifle cartridge, depending on your needs. However, for me in Florida, where like the absolute longest shot I will ever make in the jungles of Florida is 100 yards, something like this should still be adequate enough, and it's a very good option for a survivalist cartridge, assuming that you can actually make your shots. I have no idea if this thing is zeroed, by the way. If it's not, then I guess we'll just have to scrap this video. But let me send a couple of rounds down range and we'll see if we hit our wood. Alright, I have no idea if we actually made shots on target, but let's go ahead and wander down there and see what that looks like. Okay, we actually hit our target, and we actually had some pretty good grouping for the 100-yard mark, especially because I wasn't going for accuracy. I was kind of like going left and right because I didn't know if this carbine was going to be hitting left or right. But the windage is good, and I sent a couple of rounds a little bit right and a couple of rounds a little bit left, and just to kind of see if the carbine was hitting one way or the other. And, well, let's have a look at the results. We got 2 rounds here, which landed right on top of each other. Well, not right on top of each other, but that's pretty good. 1 round there, and then we got a round here and a round here, and this right here was just from me bouncing back and forth. And of course, all of them absolutely smoked their way through this wood without even slowing down. Yeah, they went right through this. 9mm at the 100-yard mark that we're talking about here has plenty of penetrative power to be able to reach the vitals of whatever medium game it is that you're going after. So if you do your part, then the ammunition will do its part, especially if you're walking a heavier projectile. Like I said, this is just 115 grains. So if you bump up the power, then you bump up your capabilities, and you bump up the amount of energy that you're going to put onto your target. Now, this right here is just the 100-yard mark. There's actually a video that Iraq Veteran 8888 did a while back, and he bumped 9mm out to 440 yards, and at that 440-yard mark, not only did he make hits on a piece of plywood that he was firing at, but he also, the rounds went through that piece of plywood he was firing at, along with a 2x4 that he was holding up the wood with. So there is, like, plenty of energy from the 9mm out at long distances to be able to penetrate plenty inside of whatever it is that you're shooting at and reach the vitals of whatever that thing is. As we bump out to farther and farther distances, we see the capabilities and the energy transfer from 9mm go from like 430 foot-pounds of energy down to like 200 and then upper 100s, and just not a whole lot of energy transferred onto the target, or that's what we tend to think. because we compare the 9mm energy transfer to other cartridges. However, at the 400-yard mark, where Iraq veteran 8888 made his shots, and it still went through like I don't know, 3 or 4 inches of wood at that distance. I'm not sure what ammunition he was using, but I mean there is not a test that I did, but I do know that I watched it, and you yourself can go watch it. As a matter of fact, I'll probably end up linking that in the description below. If I forget to link that, somebody remind me in the comments, because sometimes I do forget to do things. But out at those distances, it was still enough to go through several inches of wood, even though it only had approximately, let's ballpark it, about 200 or so foot-pounds of energy onto your target. That's still a lot of energy. If we're talking, 200 foot-pounds of energy on the surface of the tip of a projectile that is only about that big. Like, we are used to seeing just dramatic levels of energy from projectiles that we send downrange, like 2,500 foot-pounds of energy on target from a rifle cartridge or something like that. We're used to seeing these massive levels of energy on target, but because of us looking at those massive levels of energy, we see these smaller levels, like, for example, 9mm at the muzzle being 430 foot-pounds. We see these smaller levels of energy, and we don't think that it equates to much of anything because we're used to these much larger ones. And so as a result, we severely underestimate how much 400 foot-pounds of energy on a little 9mm projectile really is, or how much 175, or whatever the number I came up with was, how much 175 foot-pounds of energy at 400 yards really is, or even the 100-yard mark, that 300 foot-pounds of energy that just smoked right through that wood, no problem at all. If that was a soft target, it would probably go through that soft target. I don't have anything here that I could use to test that theory, but I'm willing to bet that it would likely go through that soft target, depending on how big the soft target is and depending what sort of bone structure it is that you are hitting and whatnot. But that's enough energy to be able to penetrate, especially if it's a soft target without bone in the way, to be able to penetrate to get to vitals, to be able to put down whatever game it is that you're looking to put down, and that's at the 100-yard mark. Now, the 200-yard mark, you might be seeing a different ball game, not necessarily with the amount of energy transferred onto your target, but more or less with the drop and the diminished in accuracy. I might go out to that 100-yard mark and accuracy test my little 9mm carbine here just to see how accurate it is. I would want to do that with something besides this cheap steel case tool ammo, because that's not overly accurate ammunition to begin with. But your ability to make shots on target with a 9mm out at, say, 200 yards would likely be a more adequate problem than you putting an adequate amount of energy onto your target to be able to put down that target. So I just wanted to go ahead and make this video to throw my 2 cents out there, because 9mm is significantly underestimated out at distances. I hear people just in the comments, whenever I was talking about this, I heard people repeatedly talk about how 9mm was going to be underpowered out at that 200-yard mark or that 300-yard mark or even beyond that, and it's simply not. It really is not unless you're going up against body armor or something like that, in which case 9mm would just be woefully inadequate. There's intermediate caliber cartridges out there that would be woefully inadequate for body armor and whatnot. This isn't, I'm not making claims of this being a combat cartridge. I'm not saying that, hey, let's give our military 9mm carbines because that's all that they need. I'm saying if you are in a survivalist situation to where, I don't know, grid down, or where you're stuck somewhere. I know there's been a couple of times where I've been stuck here at this house because of a hurricane or tornado or something like that, and roads are flooded and I'm not going anywhere for several days. As a matter of fact, I was trapped out here for a month one time. If you're in a situation like that, then 9mm could be a very adequate cartridge for basically everything it is that you would need in a situation like that. Let me know what you guys' thoughts are down below. I had fun making this video. I really did. I enjoyed doing the research and whatnot for 9mm. I discovered a whole lot of things about 9mm, and I think I really made some good argument points in comparison or in comparing 9mm to all sorts of other stuff. I'm sure a lot of people will go into the comments and they'll complain, or they'll bring up things like 12 gauge and how you can do so much with it, shotgun, slugs, buckshot, birdshot, variety of different targets, a variety of different powers and pressures and capabilities, etc., all sorts of different distances and whatnot. And yeah, shotgun shells are absolutely a really good viable option as a survivalist cartridge, just because of how much you could do with them. However, 9mm, because of the cost, the availability, the platforms that you can run it in, and how small the ammunition is and how much you can carry in comparison to 12 gauge. Not only that, but the capacity in your firearms, because it's such a smaller cartridge, the capacity inside of the firearms, and typically the ease of reloading said firearms, that all leans more towards 9mm, which is why I would pick it. Now, all of this being said, this right here is a video that is based more around an ideology of fun and enjoyment. Myself, I stock up on 9mm, particularly for my 9mm carbines, and I do that simply because of cost. A lot of people will go out and they'll stockpile like 5.56 or something like that. Well, I can get 3 shots of 9mm as opposed to 1 shot of 5.56, and I'm not going to be touching out to 200 yards for any real practical reason, not unless I start getting shots fired at me from across my cow field, in which case I'll grab something besides 5.56. But most of the things I do, a 9mm will be able to handle, especially because I'm not touching out beyond 100 yards. So that 9mm cartridge, having a bunch of it, will be able to handle most situations that I will find myself in, and I can get a lot of it for dirt cheap, and I can carry a lot of it, and it runs in so many different platforms. It's just a really good option to have. Anyway, folks, I think I've already said this, but let me know what you guys' thoughts are down below. This video is running kind of long, so I'm going to end it here. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day. I will see you guys on the next episode. Since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. Shame that bolt action shotguns aren't more mainstream.